This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders that are designing our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and I've got Blake Shumate with me today, and we're going to get into his inspiring story of childhood responsibility to corporate pressure to the life-changing reality of an MS diagnosis. He shares all of it in his new book, Wrestling for Truth, One Man's Search for Health, Family, and the Ideal Life, which follows his search for identity, faith, and stability in a world that never felt predictable. Blake Shumate, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on, Joe. Really appreciate the opportunity to meet and speak with you today.
You're very welcome. And it's funny because I feel like, Blake, you did have a bit of a bait and switch on us. I'm about to pick up your book, Wrestling for Truth, and I'm like, oh, all right, it's going to be like a macho kind of book, maybe like touching upon business and inspiration. And then all of a sudden, you drop the line, the light before they get heavy. And I'm like, whoa, what was this guy? A Deepak Chopra wrestling book? What's going on here? So tell me about this idea of how you surround this, you wrap it in wrestling, but there's like a really deep and really kind of inspirational story in there. So let's start with just like the genesis of the book and how you got from like titling it Wrestling for the Truth and it being what it was about.
Okay, yeah, sure. That's a great question. I appreciate you asking, Joe. First and foremost, I've wrestled like most of my life. It's kind of been a hobby for me when I was younger. It was a refuge, if you will. It was a place I went to kind of, toughen myself up and to get out there and do those things. And so, that means a lot to me. It taught me discipline. It taught me many things. But it mainly taught me not to give up and to kind of push forward. And and as far as the impetus of the book and, you know, uh, to your question, it sounds like a very macho title, right? Wrestling for the Truth. But a few years back, I started talking with a friend of mine and who was writing a book at the time. And we were talking about some things. And he and I have known each other for a few years. So he knew my story. And so I was kind of sharing with him what God has been pulling me through this diagnosis. And he encouraged me to say, you know what, the world needs to hear that story. And you should share that story. And so therein lies kind of that thought process. But I, I'm not a writer. It was never on my bucket list, Joe. It's not something I ever wanted to do or even thought about doing. I can write. I've done a lot of that, but um, I kind of set out to say, how can I convey what it is that God's called me for and God's put on my heart? So I went to my place of refuge. I went to the place that kind of built who I am and gave me the discipline, gave me that gumption to kind of fight. And then I chose to be very vulnerable. I chose to write a book not about anything that I did, right? More about what God has carried me through. Because when we look back, I can actually see God working in my life, and I just want the opportunity to share that with people because I feel blessed. I have a new outlook, and I just wanted the opportunity to share that.
That's awesome. And not to say that your book is not masculine. It's a very manly book, but you go into some really deep places. And Blake, as you know, when I do these conversations, I try not to give too much away the book. I want people to really dig in, but I want to like sprinkle a little bit of parts of the book in our conversation. And obviously we can't start without talking about your sister, Crystal. And which is very much a driving force of this book. I know your faith and your family has a lot to do with this, but Crystal, for folks out there, tell us about Crystal.
Crystal, is my younger sister, 3 years younger. She was um, when she was born, she was actually diagnosed with mild mental retardation, and I think that term is actually outdated now. I think in that field they call it something else. But this was the '80s, the early '80s, and you know, she couldn't speak. She could understand things and was always focused on doing what it is she wanted to do. And we had to develop a close relationship. When my mom was working 12 plus hours or doing what she needed to do to kind of provide. It was me there with her. It was me there trying to figure out and learn what it is she needed to do, what it is she needed. So I'll say this: during those years, it was kind of frustrating. It was one of those things that I just knew I had to deal with, and it was kind of just felt like part of life. But looking back on it, I know what the gift she gave me. She gave me a new paradigm to see things, to see the way others see the world. And so, she really meant a lot to me. She gave me a lot of gifts over the years. And not to say it wasn't difficult or anything, it was difficult on our entire family for sure.
And so, it's funny because with a lot of parents, you talk to them, is like it's all about giving their children responsibility. Like they'll find things like take out the trash, clean the dishes, look at them a pet, walk the dog, clean up after them, clean up after yourself. But you had responsibilities thrown at you, for lack of a better word, that most kids usually aren't given. And the fact that you were not only a brother but a caregiver. Tell us about how responsibility was sort of seeped into your DNA at such an early age and how that sort of informed you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, well, it was kind of it seeped. You could say it was dumped on me.
Well, I didn't wanna say that, Blake, but okay.
Yeah. Uh, so my parents divorced when I was about 6 years old, and I guess the better way to explain it, it wasn't necessarily dumped on you because something is dumped on you, you know it immediately, right? So I would probably compare it more to a frog in boiling water. So it was
Stirring
something
it
that
up.
kind of, yeah, it happened slowly over time, and I didn't understand it. But I was boiling, I was cooking into this, individual who was responsible in this to this individual that was an adult. And um, so by that, when my mom was at work, or if no one could be there, if my grandfather, my uncle, no one could be there, it was just me and her. So we kept the doors locked. I listened to her. I would give her the things, but I always figured it out. I figured it out pretty early that, if I'm not a little bit more organized, this is really frustrating, because she's going from thing to thing. I want to go from thing to thing myself. And, in a little while, someone's going to be home. And so I had to make sure in order to balance that. How can I do the things I want to do? How can she do the things she wants to do? And then at the end of the day, everything still be okay. You're not getting in trouble when mom gets home, and everything, and maybe even get a pat on the back, you know. So I think responsibility was boiled into me.
That's a good way of saying it. And so, talking about, that's your sibling sort of dynamic. Now, your mother's son, you write about how your mom was pretty distant, and I think for a lot of us who go through sort of traumatic instances, I remember when my father got really sick, and I was in my 20s. He was diagnosed with Huntington's disease, which is just one of the, if they were to write a top 10 list of worst diseases, I think it's probably like in the top 10. Um, and so my excuse to not seeing my father was, oh, I'm really busy with work. Like
Yeah.
diving headfirst into work. And because as a young man, it was really hard to see my father like that. Um,
Yeah.
and reading about you and your mom, I almost felt like that's was her self-defense mechanism of like, okay, I know that things are not what are perfect at home. I know I've dumped this on my son, but for me to provide for my family, I've got to put in 12-hour days. But in a way, it's a coping mechanism to not have to be in that world for those 12 hours of the day. So tell me about that party relationship with you, the mother son part of it.
So you're absolutely right on that, Joe. Like, growing up, I didn't understand it at the time. When you're boiling in that situation, I was shooting for the pat on the back. I was shooting for encouragement. I was trying to help out. I was trying to get those things. But my mom and I were not close. We didn't talk a lot. I know that we depended on one another, right? Crystal and I depended on her for providing everything. And, and she depended on us or me to take care of everything when she wasn't around. And, and I thought that was life. I thought that was everyone's life, to be truthful. But growing up, once I got older and I started looking back on it, you know, uh, I started to see things differently, not in such a negative light. Because I'm trying, hopefully you understood there's nothing negative in the book. That was kind of the purpose. In order for this to be a testimony, didn't want there to be anything negative. But, when I look back on it, she was 17 years old when she had me. When you're 6 years old or 7 years old, you don't understand that there's a young person taking care of you, that there's an adolescent, there's someone that's growing up with you. You don't understand that. And, so there were feelings of why me, why this, why that's happening. But now I actually understand it. So to your point, I think it was a defense mechanism. I think there was, some sort of even depression, maybe. I don't know. I know she dealt with a lot. She's a very strong woman. I know that, but, um, and I think that just developed into unfortunately, a distant relationship where the one thing we knew is that we can count on one another. We may not have been close in terms of personalities, in terms of friendship, but at the end of the day, she knew that she can count on me.
That's awesome. And we started this conversation talking about your love of wrestling. So let's get into how that became your escape from all of this. The fact that you were an adolescent caregiver, you've got a distant relationship with your mother. Things are not hunky dory. It's not it's not Leave It to Beaver Brady Bunch family. Um, but wrestling was your outlet. First of all, how did it become your outlet? How did you get interested in wrestling, and why was it such an amazing way for you to sort of like just throw everything out there and not leave anything behind?
So I got into it through a couple friends that I met, and we would, like probably most people, go out in the backyard, wrestle, have our own tournaments, whatever. But these guys knew what they were doing, and that always interested me. And so one day when the opportunity came up, I started the, joining the team. I wasn't sure if I was going to like it. I actually just thought of it as an opportunity to be with my buds, be with my friends and hang out. And 'cause I didn't get to do that very often. So I seized that opportunity. But when I got into it, I started receiving something that I wasn't familiar with. I started receiving the good old attaboys, the good old pats on the back, the wow, Blake, you're doing great. Let's keep going. And that type of positive encouragement, it was new to me, and I wanted more of it. So I sought it. So no matter how chaotic things got on the wrestling mat, no matter how crazy it got, there I was always seeking that encouragement because it was up to me. The spotlight was only on me. And that's kind of the thing that really attracted to me to it. It's a wrestling mat. There's only two people on it. If you know who I am, then you are, and you're a fan. You're cheering me on, and that was very motivational for me, for my coaches, to my dad, to my friends, to their parents, and it really kind of opened the door and kind of showed me that I really like chaos. I really like to organize and put and figure things out, and that's wrestling was kind of the thing that opened the door for that.
Yeah.
So
That social connection with sports, I think, I mean, if you listen to any great athlete or even like average professional athlete, the one thing they say they miss when they walk away from the sport is like the guys and the locker room and that connection. I mean, they rarely think about the game-winning touchdowns or the walk-off home runs. It's like, man, I just miss being around those guys. And I think that's why it's so hard. And the fact that that sort of was injected into your life when you really didn't know you needed it, but you really did need that sort of social connection with like-minded people who were maybe not experiencing the same thing you did, but were like in your age group. and and they could relate to you being a teenager going through puberty, liking girls or boys, what have you. So
Right.
in a way, it was sort of like the escape that you needed, or who knows where Blake your road would have led.
Right, exactly. And, that companionship, that was something I really sought. I liked competing. I liked figuring things out. Most of all, I really like to help people. And Crystal kinda that's part of the gift she gave me. I was forced to help her, which meant I was forced to figure things out, triage temper tantrums, triage messes, triage, how do I do this and go out? And that really translated into the sports environment. When the challenges came up, it really made it feel easier. Um, Easier in the sense that the only thing that I knew I had to do was just understand the steps. If I understand the steps and follow the steps, it's not going to be a problem, and nothing else I need to worry about. Even if I fail, I'll try again.
Yeah.
So the sports and my coach really just embedded a lot of that into me, and I'm so grateful. And I'm so grateful for them, for my teammates. From middle school to high school, even into college. Every one of them were very supportive, and I felt like we made each other better. You know, um, so
That's awesome. And to fast forward a little bit, I'm a big proponent on C to B. You need to see someone do something for you to try to match that or become that. It's like the Jackie Robinson effect. All of a sudden, Jackie Robinson was the first
right.
black player in the major league, and all of a sudden, all these black kids all over the country wanted to play sports. And you've seen many stories like this. And the reason I bring it up with you is you had a tumultuous home life. You had a you say the word distant relationship with your mom. Click fast forward a little bit on the control. You're a father. You don't
Right.
have the C to B because you didn't know what it was, what a normal, quote unquote, I should say, normal relationship with a son or daughter should be like. How did you learn? Like, because you didn't have it at home. So was that a struggle for you to be like, wait, so I know how like crappy parenting looked like, but how does good
Yeah.
parenting look like?
Well, first and foremost, I'm not suggesting I was a good parent at all. So that's part of the vulnerability of my book is that yes, I did have a tumultuous childhood, and I figured things out, and that became my paradigm. And so when I was thrusted into fatherhood, because I became a father when I was 23, so 6 years older than my mom, still a kid raising a kid. So at that time, I simply think I'll do everything else the same. I'll come up with a plan, I'll follow the sequence, and everything will be fine. You know, but parenting doesn't work that way. And it took me, I'm still learning this today, Joe. So, that this is, gosh, 24 or so years later, or 23 years later. And so I'm still learning how to be a parent. I'm still learning how to listen, how to be there and show up, and follow, trying to think of those examples of other people in my life. You know, why did my coach motivate me? Why did my dad motivate me? Why did these people talking to me, what about it was it motivating? They weren't correcting me, they weren't chastising me, they were encouraging me. They were telling me what I could do better, but always encouraging me on things. And it probably took well over 20 years to figure that lesson out. For
Wow.
the first 20 years, of my daughter's life, I think I was very pragmatic, very um, logical in terms of everything. And just because the world looks different through my eyes. And, but I failed to recognize what it looks like in her shoes. I failed to recognize what it is she needed for support and things like that. And, all I can say is thank God that he opened my eyes. Thank God that he opened my heart and kind of showed me these things. So I don't think it's something I've figured out yet. I think I'm on the right path. And and so I'm seeking to support her as well as other youth and other students.
Yeah, it's awesome. And it's funny, you kind of hinted though to your analytical mind. In your day job, very successful in logistics and procedures and all that stuff. We don't need to bore people with that kind of stuff. You did pretty well in that. But you talk about the idea of using this analytical mind, but I think you used the line something like emotionally numb when you were a father. It was more of like it was almost like you were the way I read it was like the relationship was very transactional. Like I knew I've got to do this for the baby to live, or I've got to
Yes.
clean them this. I've got to walk them here. I got to do this. So it was all like again, it was that your analytical mind. One of the things I always rail against the box checking mentality of like checking the box, and it felt like that's what you were doing. You were checking boxes, but you weren't exactly you were like you were skipping the nuance in between the boxes, so to speak. So, and you talk about being emotionally numb. What did emotionally numb mean to you?
Oh man. So yeah, you're 100% right. I was checking off boxes and going down that path. Um, emotionally numb to me, when I think about it is I didn't understand. I couldn't, I was only enforcing or imposing my own thoughts as I was checking those boxes off, so to speak. I knew what had to be done and I knew I had to make it happen. So in the same sense that growing up, if I wanted my sister to do something, it wasn't emotion that appealed to her. It was how things were laid out, how she was forced to make a decision, how I set up the environment that she was in. So I tried to do the same thing. I just applied the same logic to me as a father, and to a husband, but um, I applied the same logic to lay it out in that same order. And it was very difficult, and it didn't really pan out the way I thought it would, so when you apply that logic that way, it just kind of forces people to not be heard. For me, I thought I was doing everything. I'm doing the things that I didn't have,
Checking the
you
boxes.
know,
Yep.
checking the boxes, family all together, check. We've got plenty of income, check. The cabinets are full, check. Everything. My wife is now working as at home full time with my daughter, so that we can have a happy Leave It to Beaver family. Check. Everything's in place. Um, but it didn't work out that way. My flaws kept seeping through. Um, and or maybe my flaws, but what I grew up learning, what molded me. That uh, if I needed to make something happen with Crystal, I simply moved the pieces to the puzzle so that it would happen. It didn't happen that way,
Yeah.
with my wife and daughter.
Well, it's funny
So
too that you say that because in a way, your weaknesses are your strengths. Like the fact that you have this analytical mind, you do make sure when you check the box, you make sure that the box is checked. But also in life, that sucks. As you know, it's not good. But also in work, it's not all good. Yeah, you tell a story in the book how one of your coworkers' friends said you're an asshole at work.
yeah, that may sound harsh to some, but genuinely, Joe, I appreciate honesty. And like, so that was a very good relationship for me. I knew I could depend on him to tell me the truth. I knew that I can depend on him to say that. And I don't know, I could, again, I attribute it to Crystal, but I don't really it don't really get phased by cut downs, by comments, by negativity. When that gets thrown at me, I actually look for the purpose in it. What's the meaning behind it? So in that, I genuinely heard what he was saying, and he was conveying what others wouldn't tell me. So I was again applying my logic, making sure everything got done every single day in the office, just like I was doing at home. But it was happening in the office place, right? Because these people work for me. And then when my friend calls me up, it's a kind of a big eye-opening experience. Oh, so things are getting done, and I'm not really great at this. Everybody's doing it because they think I'm an asshole. So I needed to listen. I needed to start change. And the interesting thing is, I did it. I did it in the office. Just didn't carry it home.
Hmm. Why is that? And I think we're all kind of guilty of it. Like we're able to take, not everyone, again, as you know, me, like I speak in broad terms, but a lot of us, we can take input at work. But the second we get any little input at home, we're like, F that. Yeah, I'm the provider. I'm the one. The roof over this house is mine. It's always the attitude I've always felt like it's always like this very like macho fatherly thing of like, this is my house. You can't do this or say this in my house, which I always found very kind of like performative because it's everyone's house. But like, tell me, why do you think you were able to take advice, criticism, and change at work, but at home, it's like, yeah, no, I'll just, I'll just keep being the same asshole at home.
Well, yeah, that's a great question. And, I know in the office, it was easy to see the fruits of your labor, right? So if you're pushing things forward and you're working on a big project and, you've got something that has to happen, you can actually put down parameters, put down guardrails, and kind of corral people and projects into a certain direction.
And you see a
Once they,
tangible goal. There is like, you
yes,
see it at home. It's really hard to see it. It's all intangibles.
right. And also people go through it and they begrudge going through it, right? Oh, this sucks. I've got to work for this. I've got to do this. And as soon as I get done with this job, I've got to go do another task. So it turns into some things, but once you reach the goal and you do it together, it's something that sparks inside of us all. Like everyone can actually see, oh wow, I didn't know I was capable of doing that. And the next time it happens, there's not as much force. And the next time it happens, those people overperform. So it was always amazing for me to see. And I knew that would happen, because the same way, if when I pushed Crystal to do certain things, guess what? She'd do it. And then over time, she would get better at it and she would do it on her own. We're all human. We all need that little push, need that um, little direction. And so I think I was great at galvanizing, in the office place. And when I came home, that's a different story. Galvanizing in the home doesn't work, um, because your home life really should be, that I've learned now, should be surrounded in love. It should be surrounded in love, not tasks. And for me, again, my paradigm of home life was all task driven. You know, what's getting done? Is what's being turned on, turned off? What's being left out? All these things. And hey, this is super easy, guys. Let's do this. And galvanizing at home didn't pan out to be the same way. It actually drove a wedge. Drove a wedge into, you're not letting me be who I need to be. You're not letting me grow. You're not seeing me and listening to me. And, that took me a long, long time to actually understand. But it was easier in the office because the fruits of the labor were almost immediate.
Yeah. Yeah, so your book, we talked about like your home life, love of wrestling, you take off in your career, you're an asshole, but then you kind of fix that. Um, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, cool. Story's done. Nope, not for Blake Shumate. You get
No,
diagnosed with MS. What
that's
the
right.
F?
That was a blessing in disguise. It was one of those things. It's kind of like, I don't know. I like to think of it this way, Joe. I like to think of it as everything was going well. I'm using the talents that God has given me. But you know what? I'm not using it the right way. And how do you get someone to use their gifts the right way? How do you get someone to appreciate life, to appreciate and love everyone that's around them? So I think I like to believe that MS was not a curse, it was a blessing. It's something that slowed me down. Before that diagnosis, I was a one man army. I could, work 24/7. Well, not seven, maybe 24/4. That might be better. But, but I could work nonstop. I could figure out problems. If you weren't willing to help me, fine, I'll do it myself. That's been my life. And, but after this diagnosis, you know, and it happened rather quickly too, from the diagnosis probably to 3, 4 months in. I couldn't type anymore. My hands were so neuropathic. It was getting harder to walk. So I was becoming dependent on people. And, and which is not something I have ever been in my life. I've haven't depend been I never didn't depend on my parents. I didn't depend on my sister. Um, I didn't depend on anyone to teach me things. I always try to figure things out. And now I was forced to. Now I was forced to learn a lesson that I never took the time to learn before or had the opportunity to. So I'm thankful. I see it as a blessing. It now, of course, I do. There was probably about 3 years um, that I was pretty much in a dark place.
Yeah,
Pretty
and
much
let's go
thinking,
there a little bit because
yeah,
I'm curious because we talk about the trials and tribulations of your life, and everyone goes through their own shit. But
yep,
like, did you get to somewhere, Blake, where you were like, when you get the diagnose? Well, obviously, maybe while you're going before you got diagnosed, you're going through this. Do you look around and you're like, you look up at God, and you're like, really? Really? After everything I've done, this is what you give me now? Was there some not like a woe is me? Maybe it was a woe is me, but was there something like on everything I've dealt with? Feel like I'm coming around the other side of the mountain, and then you'd slap me with this. Was there any of that during that dark period?
Actually, it wasn't. I never cursed God or even asked him why me. And again, I was super independent. When that happened, instead of seeking him, instead of going to him in refuge, that dark place, that was me sulking. That was me living in my own head of depression, right? My own thoughts. And so, I thought it was something that I had to overcome. I thought it was, and then it transitioned to something that this is now my life. I have to learn how to accept this. And so, and that's another trait of mine, is that, I kind of accept things rather quickly. I go to the lowest level. I put myself at the bottom of the pit as quickly as I can, because, I'd rather start at the bottom and climb up than not know how far I'm falling. And so when I can do that, it puts things back in my control. So I never questioned God, because I just thought this life was all about me and the things that I need to do. And so there was a lot of thinking I can do it on my own. There was a lot of thinking, you know, I'll figure this out. This will all go away, But it took some time, but he taught me some lessons.
Out of curiosity, because I know my father was not a man of faith until he was diagnosed, and then he was like, all of a sudden, because I remember as a little kid, my mom used to drag me and my brother to church, or my dad used to just stay home because he was a machinist, so he was like, when he was home, he was exhausted. Um, so he didn't go to church on Sundays. But I remember when he got diagnosed, him and my mom started going to church constantly. When did you? When was? I mean, I know faith's always been part of your life, but when did you become, for quote unquote, like a believer in that that this is the righteous path? Like, was there a point in life that happened, or was that sort of like your mindset throughout?
I've always gone to church. That's something that my family made sure happened. If my mom was working or she couldn't go, my uncle would pick us up and take us, or my grandfather, somebody would take us to church. And I loved being at church. It was where a lot of my friends were. And, I always had a great time. It was also my sister's second favorite place to be. She loved being at church. And so, when the doors were open, she was there. And, I had a couple of close friends, and their parents were big time believers, and they always made sure I was in church. So the belief, the faith, the acceptance, it was always there. So, but that was there through my childhood. And then as I got older, well, honestly, I guess when I went away to college, it became more about being in the moment and doing what's entertaining, doing what's fun. And then, you know, which kind of left me in a period where I was steering away from God. And I steered away for several years. I didn't have that close relationship. I became what most people would call just a pew Christian, showing up and on Sundays and that's it.
Right.
And but again, through this diagnosis, through these trials, not seeking him in refuge those first couple years, and then one day, when I felt like I was actually at rock bottom, that's when he spoke to me. That's when I could feel that, listen, I've been doing it all wrong. I need to seek him and put refuge in him. And it's okay to have faith. But if you believe in something, then you back it up and you do it. So if you believe in me, this is God talking to me. If you believe in me, then why aren't you doing or acting like you believe in me? And that's when I kind of put two and two together and I slowly started diving more into the word, diving more in prayer and figuring out what that means. And, it took me a long time, but I'm thankful to have learned that lesson.
Hmm. There has to be a bit of cognitive dissonance when you are a person of deep faith, because it's one of those things where it's hard to live that faith 100% 24/7 or 24/4 as you talk about, because there's certain parts of, I'm just gonna random say, like, for example, like, a deeply religious person is probably pro-life because that's what the it talks about life, but at the same time, they probably would have sex before marriage, but that's still a sin. So there's always like this, as a Catholic myself, or kind of more
Yeah.
agnostic, it's like grocery store Catholic, like you
Yeah.
pick and choose what parts of the Bible you call them pews. I like that. But like you, we've sort of talked about your life, how it was always an uphill fight, yet but also you made some of that trouble yourself. Is there What part of you, like, breaks away from a man of faith? Like, what part of you, like, turns off your faith side and turns you an asshole at work? Do you, like, all of a sudden forget about faith? Is it not important at that moment? And I know it's a tough question to answer, Blake, but I'm often curious about people that are deeply religious and how they could turn off or pick and choose what parts of their faith they're going to embrace. And since you've been through this journey, are you now more aware of the fact that, like, oh yeah, like, when I was being an asshole at work, I wasn't being a man of faith, but I just didn't realize it.
Yeah, no. So which great question, Joe. So faith to me has changed over time. So when growing up, I thought faith was going to church. I thought faith was, being present and going through the motions, right? I didn't understand that what surrender meant. I didn't understand, that I need to have more faith in his plan and his vision. So it made it easy for me to separate that because if I imagine something and I work towards it, it happened. It happened every single time. So, okay, I guess going through the motions is working. And showing up, doing things like churches, giving things away and all that stuff, making sure my wife and daughter were in church. Those were all things of faith in my mind, right? But I had to be broken down. I had to be pulled down to the bottom to understand what faith is, to understand that church is not a building. You know, we are the church. So where God lives is where, right? Where we worship is where it's in our own hearts. And once I kind of understood that and started really diving more into scripture and kind of seeing that, okay, if I look back at all my memories and I look back at everything I can remember and put things together, that never was me. It was God's straight shining through me. It was his light, because I was in a dark place, but he was lighting everything up through me, so I was a normal human and thought, oh, that's my doing, right? Because we all do that. And that's when I kind of understood it never was about me. It never was about my faith in the church. It was about my faith that God is within me. It's my faith that God is around me. It's my faith that he will see me through all things. It's my faith that if something doesn't work out or if something negative happens, it's in God's will. And I need to seek the lesson of that. So that was a really difficult thing for me to transition out of. And I'm still working on it today. It's actually an everyday thing. And anyone who tells you anything different's lying to you. You have to very, very intentionally have this mindset, that I'm going to see God's glory in all things, in His creation.
And thank you for indulging me on that because I know it was kind of a weird question because I don't want to be clear. I don't expect people that have or practice faith to be perfect. I get that they're going to make mistakes, but I think the one thing that's always missing, and you kind of alluded to there, it's like the self awareness piece. Like you think, oh, I'm going to church, I'm giving a charity, I'm doing my prayers, I'm going, depending on what denomination I'm going to confessional. But then you don't realize all this stuff happens in between is also part of the faith, but you just kind of like just lack that awareness. Like it's almost like there is like a bit of it's not an on off switch. It's almost like a dimmer. It's like, oh, okay, now I'm at work. I don't have to be nice to be kind to one another
Yes.
and with business. It worked. Dial that down a little bit. It's okay.
Yeah. No, that's totally an eye-opening situation. That essentially you think that there's an hour, one day a week that you dress up and you go and you sing and you do all these things. That's, listen, in my own opinion, that's a trap in itself. Because why would you give God just an hour a week, or let's be generous and say 4 hours a week? When why would He put you on this earth to live X amount of years to get so many hours of time, when the fact is that He put us on this earth to live with us, to show us compassion, to show us, His glory through us, which means, hey, when you help someone, when you do things for others, you get that dose that He gave you, right? That dose of oxytocin, or those dose of chemicals, um, for you, which, um, when that happens, it really just changes you, yeah, completely.
That's awesome. Blake, I always wrap up these conversations taking folks behind the dedication of the book, and yours is short and sweet. If you know me, then you know this isn't about me.
That's
You
right.
kind of hinted it earlier, but tell me the importance for like really like the people that know you that like this book is not like the Blake Shumate, epic story of a wrestler who came from the bottom and now he's at the top. But take me behind that line.
So really, there's a kind of a simple meaning behind that line. If people know me, that and you really know me, I've had a lot of interesting things happen in my life.
Well, if you
You
listen to
know,
this, you got a taste of some of it.
Some of it, yeah, but
Yeah.
there's tons of things that I chose not to put in the book. There's life or death situations that I can, there's at least 5 of them, and I chose not to talk about those, and because to me, those were things that lifted me up more than showing how God worked and how God corrected me. So, I like to think that my close friends, they'll think of those 4 or 5 stories on this side, and then my fraternity brothers will think about something else. My coworkers will think about all these other accolades or these other things that have happened, and like, huh, I guess he's going to talk about all that stuff. It, I tried not to. This book is not a book; it's a testimony. It's a faith-driven memoir, and so, by when I'm putting it together, I want to make sure that everything in this book, it's it's not necessarily my story; it's the story of God working through me, and so that this is me going back and looking back on everything I went through, and actually see that this was Him restoring me, and so I left all the cool stuff out, left all the negative stuff out, and kind of focused on those things that I had to go through. Because, like you said at the beginning of this whole thing, everybody's got a bunch of stuff that they're going through. So for those that are going through struggle, I wanted to kind of be vulnerable and share my own mindset, and the gifts that God's given me. And, I'm hopeful that it touches someone's heart. I'm hopeful that it helps them see, you know, that they're seeking refuge in the wrong place. And, God is always with them, and He will use us whether we allow it or not. It's just so much better when we surrender. It's so much better when we give in to Him. And like, I like to think of the analogy, Joe. If you take, a cup of water, and you're in the middle of the cup of water, and you're going side to side, What happens if you fight against that? Probably going to be just flailing around, maybe even running to the side of the cup. But what if you surrender? Then you give in to the current and you flow back and forth with it. And then there's a beauty in that. And there's a beauty in God's plan. And so, finding that peace, finding that surrender, that meant everything.
You can read all about it in Wrestling for Truth, One Man's Search for Health, Family, and the Ideal Life. His name is Blake Shumate. Blake, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Joe, it was fabulous talking with you. I really appreciate the time today, and thank you, sir.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Blake and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.